Chapter 7. Aaron reported to the costume shop shortly after 6, as instructed. It was a large area behind the rehearsal rooms, lit with dozens of fluorescent lights. Several heavy-duty sewing machines were clustered at one end, amid long tables surrounded with stools. Dressmaker dummies stood in the corner like a small army next to tall shelves stuffed with bolts of fabric. A three-way mirror and a few dressing rooms, made from PVC pipe and hung with curtains, stood along the wall opposite the fabric shelves. "Aaron!" Anna looked up from her work table. She hooked a finger around the cord to her earbuds and pulled them loose. "How gorgeous! Who's it for?" Aaron asked, admiring the delicate black lace shawl Anna was working on. "You? I think it's for the last scene," Anna replied. I didn't think I had a shawl for that scene." Anna wrinkled her brow. "Kathleen told me about it yesterday. I guess Mona added it at the last minute." She picked up a pair of tiny scissors and started snipping at dangling threads. Aaron bit her lip. Props were always a challenge, especially something as personal as a shawl. Now she would have to think about how Charlotte would wear it, and why. Not to mention practicing with it enough so it seemed natural. But if that's what Mona wanted, that's what Mona would get. "All these changes," she sighed. "I know," Anna said sympathetically. She worked in the costume department, but was also a good actress in her own right, and had been in her share of productions. Kathleen, the costume director, came in a few minutes later, and they got down to business, working through the final fittings for Aaron's costumes. Charlotte's dresses were all sedate grays and blacks, fitted in the bodice with modest-sized hoop skirts. During rehearsal, Aaron wore a white practice slip sewn with hoops over her street clothes, so she could get used to moving in them. "Can I take a shawl home with me so I can work with it?" Aaron asked when they were finished with the fitting. Anna hurried to the costume storage room and returned with an embroidered pink shawl, the same size and weight as the real version. "This is your stunt shawl," she laughed, handing it over. It was after 8 when Aaron finally left the theater. By the time she'd finished her grocery shopping, she was exhausted and dragged herself up the stairs to her apartment. Aaron's roommate, Sarah, sat at the kitchen table, her short blonde hair secured with a headband, and her bright red reading glasses propped on her head. "I was beginning to worry about you," she said. "Just my glamorous life in show business," Aaron groaned. She dropped her backpack on the floor and began rummaging through her grocery bags. "I'm starving." "I made spaghetti," Sarah said, pointing at a pot on the stove. "There's some left over if you want it." "Thank you. Spaghetti sounds much better than canned clam chowder." Aaron threw Sarah a grateful smile and went to the kitchen to unload her groceries before dishing up a plate. Sarah was a student at WVU, working on her graduate project, which, as far as Aaron could tell, involved a lot of Facebook time. She and Sarah weren't close, but they got along pretty well for roommates. "Matt came over," Sarah said as Aaron sat down to eat. "He said you weren't answering his texts." "He knows I never have my phone on in rehearsal." "When are you going to put the poor boy out of his misery?" Sarah asked. Aaron twirled the noodles with her fork. "I don't know," she admitted. "I know I should, but I don't want to hurt him. And I guess if I'm honest, I don't want to lose him. How selfish am I?" "If it's not mutual, it's not mutual," Sarah shrugged. "He's a big boy, he can take it. He took it pretty well when I told him you said he was boring." "What?" Aaron's eyes widened in horror. "When did you tell him that?" "Tonight when he came over. He tried to pick my brain about you, and I straight up told him you said he was boring." "I never said he was boring," Aaron protested. "You said he was predictable and had no spontaneity." Sarah said it in a tone as if she were quoting. Aaron's mind flashed back to a recent late-night conversation they'd had. She had said that, or very nearly. Guilt pounded through her. It doesn't mean he's boring. Same difference. Sarah's eyes flickered to her computer. I did you a favor. Maybe he'll finally realize you're not interested. Aaron's stomach felt tied in knots. What did he say? Not much, Sarah replied. Just looked kind of thoughtful. I don't think he was mad. No, Matt didn't get mad. Hurt, upset, troubled, worried. She'd seen those. He wasn't the type to lose his temper, and she suspected he was more hurt than angry. But hurting Matt was the last thing she wanted to do. Aaron ate the rest of her spaghetti in silence, accompanied only by the tapping of Sarah's fingers on the keys and her occasional mutterings. I'm going to go see Matt, she said as she put her dishes in the sink. I'll clean up when I get back. Sarah, deep into an online article, merely waved. Aaron paused outside Matt's apartment and took a deep breath. He lived on the same floor, 3 doors down. But where Aaron and Sarah shared a 2-bedroom, Matt's apartment was a 1-bedroom, and he lived alone. Ignoring the brass knocker on the forest green door, she rapped with her knuckles in a quick staccato pattern. Come in, Aaron, Matt hollered from inside. She pushed the door open. How did you know it was me? You're the only one who knocks like that, he said. He sat cross-legged on the floor in front of his upended bicycle, tinkering with the chain and the gears. A lock of blonde hair fell over his forehead, which was wrinkled in concentration as he glowered at the bike. What are you doing? Aaron asked nervously. His head was down and she couldn't read the expression on his face. If his feelings were hurt, she couldn't tell. Stupid chain fell off on my ride home from work, and I had to walk 2 miles. How was rehearsal? She shrugged. Good. The usual. They changed it again, so I have a bunch more lines to learn. Matt shook his head. At some point, they've got to decide it's good enough, right? Why keep messing with something before you even know how an audience will like it? Who knows? She perched nervously on the arm of his couch, unsure how to bring up Sarah. He gave her a sidelong glance, and a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You can relax. I know I'm boring. That's not what I said, she protested. I promise. It's okay. I mean, no one likes being called boring, but I know I tend to be reserved and methodical, and you don't. I get it. I can be methodical, she protested. He gave a short laugh. Yeah, right. Isn't this the same girl who told me schedules give her the hives? I was speaking metaphorically. I'm really good at schedules. I never miss rehearsals. Okay, I'll give you that one. But how about your day off plan? Matt asked with a teasing smile. He put the screwdriver he held on the floor and went to the kitchen to wash his hands. Several months ago, Erin had drawn up with an elaborate agenda for days she did not have to work. She'd presented it proudly to Matt, showing him the blocked-out times every day, dedicated to cleaning, exercise, and career development, which included voice and monologue practice. The idea was to be more productive, but Matt had scoffed and predicted she wouldn't last 2 weeks. He was right. Being locked into a routine had driven her crazy, and she'd thrown the schedule away after only a few days. Erin flushed. That was a little overly ambitious, she admitted. He chuckled as he turned from the sink and picked up a kitchen towel to dry his hands. We don't have to be exactly the same. Opposites attract, you know. His tone was light, but she knew him well enough to grasp his underlying meaning. See what great friends we are? Wouldn't we make a great couple, too? Well, I'm glad we got that cleared up, she said, working to keep things casual. I was afraid Sarah had hurt your feelings. He gave her a small smile. He knew exactly what she was doing. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. It wasn't even 10 yet. On any other night, she would have stayed at his place for a Netflix binge, or a long conversation, or maybe just to sit side by side and surf the net, enjoying the quiet comfort of his presence. But she sought escape as quickly as possible, afraid he'd try to bring up the romance question again, and push for answers she couldn't give. Chapter 8. The next morning was gray and the clouds spit rain in fits and spurts. The early morning light was still hazy when Matt got to the studio. He checked the temperatures on the furnaces and arranged his tools, then got ready to make the first pull. Eyes narrowed in concentration, he pulled the pipe from the furnace with his first gather of glass glowing on the end. He moved to the narrow workbench and sat, then positioned the pipe on the high sides of the bench and began rolling it back and forth. He kept the pipe moving with one hand and grasped large metal tweezers in the other, using them to pull and shape the glass, like taffy, into a swirled pattern. Back and forth, over and over, the smooth metal pipe rolling between his palms. There was something almost hypnotic and deeply calming about it. When he finally had the shape he wanted, he stopped rolling and bent to blow into the pipe, watching as a small bubble formed in the glass. After a few more minutes of shaping, he was ready for the cover gather, additional glass to enclose the swirled pattern once the piece was finished. This was how he liked to work, in the early morning before Corbin arrived, before the phone started ringing. No bills, no paperwork, just the radio playing in the background while he danced with the glass, working, pulling, and shaping to create something beautiful. He was heading toward the furnace to collect the cover gather when there was a loud crack. The glass snapped at the joining point, and the delicate vase he'd been shaping shattered on the concrete floor. Matt swore under his breath. There went more than an hour of work. Well, that's how it went. One had to be careful with glass. Too much pressure and it would crack. Not enough and it wouldn't take form. And if he was careless, there was always the chance of getting burned. The metaphor did not escape him. Was he pushing too hard with Erin? Or not pushing hard enough? How far could he push before she broke? The relationship he wanted with her was much like each new glass piece he envisioned. Never as easy to form in real life, and always with the threat of never being rendered at all. What happened? Ma's voice surprised him. He hadn't heard her come in. She stood in the doorway to the studio, eyeing the broken glass on the floor. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine, Matt replied. Just a bad pull. Can you stop for a minute? She asked, nodding toward the office. Sure, be right there. He used tongs to pick up the ruined pieces and throw them into a pile in the corner to cool. He'd add them back to the molten glass in the furnace later. Ma was at the desk with a spreadsheet open on the computer. Matt dragged a chair to her side and sat down, scanning the columns and the numbers in the total row along the bottom. Most of them were negative. Not good, huh? He sighed heavily. No, she said seriously. And with Corbin getting married next year, she trailed off. The business will have to support 3 families instead of 2, Matt finished. She nodded. He bent his head and dragged his hands through his hair, studying the floor. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to put this all on you, she said. But it is, he shrugged. Corbin was a skilled craftsman, but he was content to work the glass and leave the day-to-day running of the business to Matt. And Ma would manage the books, but that was all. If they were going to find new ways for the studio to survive, he would have to do it. But how? They had the commission from the mayor's office for the Christmas ornaments, along with a few other special orders, and some revenue came in from the items people bought from the showroom or the website. But it wasn't enough. It always amazed him how quickly the money went out, and how slowly it seemed to come in. His mother laid her hand on his arm. We'll figure something out, she said quietly. I guess I could always move home and save on the rent at my apartment, he suggested. only half joking. Ma's eyes widened. "I'm finally about to get rid of your brother," she said in mock horror. "Now you're telling me I'm going to have you lurking around all the time?" "You make me sound like a stray cat," he grumbled. "Not a stray cat, but maybe a little lost in your own way," she pointed out. Talking about the business was painful enough. Matt definitely didn't want to get into a long discussion about his personal life. He leaned forward and planted a quick kiss on her cheek. "Thanks for all you do, Ma. You're right. We'll figure something out." He escaped to the studio, leaving her to her spreadsheets and columns of numbers that never seemed to balance, no matter how hard they tried. Chapter 9. The grayness of the morning matched Erin's mood. She'd been awake much of the night, thinking of Matt. Why was life so complicated? Why couldn't he find someone who would give him what he wanted so that they could continue to be friends? In the back of her mind, though, she knew once either of them found the romantic love they wanted, their friendship would have to change, maybe even end. The thought pierced her heart like a sliver. Her phone rang as she threaded her way through downtown traffic toward the theater. It was her father. Her heart hammered and she grabbed the phone. "Hi, Daddy. I'm driving. Give me a second." Erin glanced over her shoulder and quickly pulled onto a side street, then pressed the phone to her ear. "I can talk now. How are you?" "I'm fine. Your mother said you called?" Her dad never had much patience for small talk. Uh, yeah. I'm wondering if you could give me another advance." A long silence was followed by his gusty sigh. "Again? You told me last month's advance would be the last one." He would be calling from his huge desk in the big white house with the black shutters in North Carolina, where she'd grown up. The windows of his office overlooked the backyard, with its wide flower beds and lush lawn, which sloped gently down to the slow-moving river. 5 huge weeping willows edged the river, dripping their trailing branches into the greenish water. One of the trees still held the weathered remains of the treehouse her brothers had built when they were little. When they moved away from home, the treehouse had become Erin's domain, and the scene of many afternoons spent reading, writing, singing, and most importantly, acting. Erin had staged many productions there in which she was always the ill-used heroine with a handsome prince waiting in the wings to rescue her. But aside from one notable session where she'd convinced her next-door neighbor to play along, her prince never came. Princes didn't come in the form of surly 11-year-olds who would only participate if she promised to let them borrow the canoe afterward anyway. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she said now. "I had to go to a wedding last week and it ended up costing more than I thought." "If you couldn't afford it, you shouldn't have gone," he grumbled. "What about your job? I thought you were working somewhere." "I was, but I had to quit when we started rehearsals," she said, imagining him grinding his teeth the way he did when he got annoyed. She rushed ahead. "But Broadway is looking really promising, and if it happens—" "Do you have that in writing?" "In writing? No, not yet. My contract is with the company here in Morgantown." "Then don't count on it." Her fingers clenched around the steering wheel. She hated talking to her father about money. Why couldn't her mother handle it? Mom never lectured or asked difficult questions. Erin knew her father loved her and he was always fair, but at the mention of money, he'd snap just as fiercely as the turtles she used to find along the banks of the river. Erin usually left the turtles alone, but she couldn't afford to do the same with her father. "I'm sorry," she said in a low voice. "I'll pay it back. I've always said I'll pay it back, or I can count it against your inheritance. Yes, I know, Erin," her father said. "How much do you need?" She gave him an amount, and he sighed. "Fine, I'll send you a check." "Thank you, Daddy. I really appreciate it," she said, relieved. "But," he began, and her feeling of relief evaporated. "This is the last time. If you can't support yourself with acting, you need to be adult enough to admit it and make changes, just like your brother did." Aaron had always thought Dalton caved too easily to their father's demands to find a stable career. But now that she was on the receiving end of his pressure and disdain, she wondered if she'd been too hard on her oldest brother. Dalton had always wanted to be a musician. He'd taken guitar lessons, practiced endlessly, and even formed a cliché garage band when he was a teenager. But aside from playing a few gigs in smelly bars when he was in college, the band had gone nowhere, and their father had absolutely refused to bankroll what he deemed a waste of time and money. Dalton had talent, no question, but he'd given in during his second year of college and switched from a music major to business. Now he helped run their father's marketing firm. "It's a process, Daddy," she said, playing her baby girl cards. "I'm getting there." "You're already 26. You don't want to be farther behind your peers than you already are," he shot back, apparently unmoved. "My offer to pay for college still stands, you know." Her throat was too tight to reply. "I'm not trying to upset you, honey," he pressed when she didn't answer. "Call it tough love if you will, but all I want is for you to be successful and happy." In that order, too, no doubt. In her father's world, happiness was inexorably linked with success, and success meant money. "I know. Thank you," she managed. After he hung up, she sat for a while in the idling car, watching the rain dribble down her windshield. Her hands were shaking as she thought over his threat to cut off financial help. What would she do if this play didn't take off? She could go back to retail or restaurant work, but she could never support herself with those. College? Maybe, but she had no idea what she would do. Performing was all she'd ever wanted. She could start her own theater company, but that was a long uphill struggle before she'd see any kind of profit. So what did that leave? Teach acting and voice lessons? "But I want to be the one on stage," she whispered. She didn't want to sit in the audience watching one of her students perform, watching someone else live her dream. Did that make her selfish? Maybe she should move to California. Several of her theater friends had gone to LA and were making the endless audition rounds for movies, TV shows, and commercials. A few of them were even doing pretty well. Her hand twitched toward the phone, wanting to call Matt, to unload her troubles on him and ask his advice. But Matt was a sturdy shoulder to cry on, not an objective outsider. It wouldn't matter if she got scathing reviews from every theater critic on the Eastern Seaboard. Matt would staunchly insist she was the best actress in the world. She threw the car into gear, her mind spinning as quickly as the wheel as she did a U-turn, and edged her car back into traffic, back toward the theater. Chapter 10. It was Erin's last Saturday off before the nonstop craziness of Tech Week kicked in, and she was determined to make the most of it, which meant no alarms, pancakes at noon, and spending the day buried in a good book. So she was more than a little annoyed to be awakened so rudely. "Day 1 of the great Matt is not boring experiment starts now," Matt hollered, yanking her covers off. She shot a glance at the clock and groaned. "It's 6 in the morning." "Yes, and we have a lot to do, so get up." He bounced her mattress with his knee. She clawed for the duvet desperately, but he held it out of her reach. "No, 5 more minutes." He shook his head. "Sleep is for the weak. Come on, I've got the whole day planned." "Whatever I said about you being predictable, I take it back," she mumbled. "You're the most interesting man in the world. Can I please go back to sleep?" "Nice try," Matt said, "but I'm not buying it. Get your lazy butt out of bed." Erin dragged herself toward the shower with a scowl. What kind of monster had she created? She emerged from the bathroom, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, but still barefoot and with her hair caught up in a towel, to find him sitting on her unmade bed with his iPad. "So what's your grand, amazing plan that's taken over my day off?" "Come here." He patted the mattress. She sat beside him and studied the colorful spreadsheet on the iPad. Across the top was the title, Matt is not boring. She burst into laughter. Seriously? You made a spreadsheet? Yes, he said defensively. And it's very helpful, see? He pointed to the side column, which held a list of activities along with their location and time. You can pick any activity you want. Then when we've done it, I'll put a check in the correct box. He demonstrated by tapping one of the boxes and sighed in satisfaction when a thick black checkmark appeared. It'll help us keep track of what we've already done. I even added a column where we can rate each experience so we'll know which we want to do again. Aaron broke into a peal of helpless giggles. What? He insisted. You made a spreadsheet, the most boring document on the planet, to prove you're not boring? She started giggling again. Matt looked from the iPad to her and back again. It's not boring, he protested, pointing. Look, I made it colored. That's cool. Her only response was to collapse backward on the bed, laughing harder than ever. It'll be very useful. You'll see, smarty pants, Matt said, setting the iPad on her nightstand. Before she could stop him, he leaned over, grabbed her ankle, and began tickling the bottom of her bare foot. Say it, he urged. I'm a genius. Say it. Aaron shrieked and kicked, trying to break his grip. Say it, Matt insisted, laughing. Okay, you two, what's going on in here? Sarah stood in the open doorway, hands on her hips, her sleep-mussed hair sticking out in all directions. Matt dropped her foot and Aaron sat up. Ask him, he's being a brat, she panted. Me? Matt's face was a picture of innocence. I'm never a brat. You, on the other hand. He nudged her with his shoulder. I'm staying out of it. Sarah rolled her eyes and went toward the kitchen. Hurry. Matt grabbed his iPad and stood up. We have things to do today. He left her bedroom, closing the door behind him. Aaron couldn't help smiling. This was better than pancakes at noon. Where are we going? She asked 20 minutes later when she emerged from her bedroom. She'd changed into an embroidered white blouse, topped with a navy blazer, her skinny jeans, and brown boots, and she'd left her hair long and loose down her back in rose gold waves. I didn't pick from your cute little list. You lost choosing privilege because you mocked my cute little list, Matt replied. So I get to pick. And today we're going to Pittsburgh. Aaron looped a narrow scarf of gold sequins around her neck a few times. Okay, why? Anna Skipska has a new exhibit at the Carnegie. Anna who? He sighed tragically. Anna Skipska, the famous glass artist. Oh. Aaron tried to think if she'd ever seen any of her work, but nothing came to mind. And, Matt continued, Guys and Dolls is playing at the Benny-Dum, so I thought we could do both. I love Guys and Dolls, Aaron squealed. I know, he said proudly. Aaron didn't miss the sideways glance Sarah gave her from the table. What are we waiting for then? She laughed a little uneasily, acutely aware he'd just shown her up. Matt's car was a small, serviceable bottle green Honda. It had seen better days, and probably wouldn't be a great choice for a cross-country road trip, but it could handle the 2-hour drive to Pittsburgh. When they arrived, they went directly to the Carnegie. Anna Skipska's work was an unreal display of precision and skill. The black rooms were lit primarily by the white lights bathing the enormous exhibits, each made from thousands of clear or amber glass rods that were bent, worked, and balanced to create complex three-dimensional shapes. One room held cubes of varying sizes, another had spheres, and another featured cylinders. The intricate webs of glass somehow projected an immensely heavy, yet oddly ethereal quality. Matt was completely absorbed, and his excitement as they entered each room was palpable. He took his time, taking each piece as a whole, then gradually getting closer so he could examine the minute details, such as the way the glass rods were joined or how the varying degrees of thickness added to the piece. Why don't you do this? Aaron asked as they stood next to a large glass pyramid dangling upside down from the ceiling.
Do what? This?
He waved his arm toward the pyramid. No, she clarified. Why don't you have an art exhibit of your own? You have some amazing work. He laughed wryly. You do, she insisted. You're a great artist. You don't give yourself enough credit.
That's nice of you to say so, he replied, but she could tell he didn't really believe her.
After the museum, they had lunch at a sandwich shop, then made their way to the theater for the matinee performance of Guys and Dolls. Having spent years in the business, it was sometimes hard for Erin to get completely lost in a show. She noticed technical details, like how the lighting worked to set the mood, whether the costumes were appropriate to the time period, or how smoothly or not the set changes happened. But the cast and crew were doing their jobs well, and Erin soon found herself transported to Runyonland, along with the characters. While Miss Adelaide was singing her lament, Erin moved to rest her elbow on the armrest, just as Matt did the same, and they collided. Sorry, she murmured, quickly withdrawing her arm. The lament was one of Erin's favorite parts of the show. She had even used it as an audition piece. But suddenly, she couldn't focus. Suddenly, she was very aware of Matt, his nearness, the heat coming from his shoulder inches from hers, the way he clasped his hands together across his stomach as he watched the performance. If she were to rest her head on his shoulder, would he put his arm around her? His cologne had faded, but she knew he wore a slightly spicy scent. Would she be able to smell it again if she buried her face in his neck? She forced her attention back to the show, but the spell was broken, and she was an outsider again, noticing that Nicely's microphone buzzed slightly, and the spotlight was a tad slow following Sky during his rendition of Luck Be a Lady. Her awareness of Matt seemed to wash over her like a wave. With it came a sense of longing?
Now what shall we do? He asked when they emerged from the theater. Are you hungry?
It's rush hour, she pointed out. The street in front of the theater was already packed with slow-moving cars. I'll bet traffic's going to be bad for a while.
He shrugged. So? We don't have anywhere to go, do we?
When they reached the car, they pulled up restaurant suggestions on Matt's phone and decided on a place a few miles away.
What's your life goal?
Matt asked as they crawled through city traffic. Like, my main, ultimate life goal? She asked. You already know. I want to be a Broadway star. Maybe even a legend like Bernadette Peters. I mean, I know it's a long shot, but as long as we're dreaming. She gave him a sheepish grin. What's yours? He was quiet for a minute, studying the road.
I guess I want to feel like I was a good person, even if I didn't believe in God and thought this life was the end. I'd want to die knowing I contributed more good than evil to the world.
I don't think you need to worry about that, Erin told him. You're pretty much the best person I know.
Thanks.
He blushed slightly.
That means a lot to me.
Your answer makes mine seem really dumb by comparison, she said after they'd gone several blocks in silence.
No,
he said at once, giving her a quick sideways smile.
You want to do good too. You want to give people art, help them experience something amazing. That's a great goal.
You're making me sound much more altruistic than I really am, Erin admitted. I'm kind of selfish, I guess.
Because you want fame?
She shrugged. Don't all actors live for applause?
But why do you want applause? He pressed. Because it means approval, and that means you gave someone else an experience that made them happy. You touched their heart in some way and might have even touched their life. Sounds pretty unselfish to me.
You're simply determined to try and see the best in me.
It's pretty easy.
He winked. He was so open, so trusting. He would never break her heart. If she gave him any encouragement, he would be right there, patiently waiting for her as long as it took. The thought should have been comforting, but for some reason she found it irritating.
It wasn't fair of him to put it all on her, to make her decide the depth of their relationship. She thought back to her reaction in the theater, the urge she'd had to lean into him. He'd upset the routine by taking them away from home and away from the familiar. It was messing with her head and her heart. What if she let herself go like he had, and they became a couple, and it didn't work out? If they took it to the next level, it could ruin their friendship, and Matt's friendship was one of the most important things she had. "You know what? I changed my mind," she said. "I'm not that hungry after all. Why don't we just stop for something quick on the way home?" "You can't run away from this forever," he said softly. "I'm not running away," she protested. "I'm just tired and ready to go home." His eyes betrayed his disappointment, but he only nodded and pulled into a nearby Wendy's for burgers and fries. They ate in the car and drove back to Morgantown, mostly in silence. Chapter 11. The doorbell rang at 7 the next morning, and Aaron groaned. 2 days in a row? Matt was definitely going to get it. The doorbell rang again, and she jumped out of bed and met Sarah in the hallway coming out of her room. "That better either be Tom Hiddleston or someone with a huge lottery check," Sarah muttered. Aaron turned the deadbolt and opened the door. Mrs. Brinkerhoff stood in the hallway. She wore a fitted dress in an eye-watering shade of fuchsia, topped with a bright yellow cardigan, suntan nylons, and black snow boots. Her white hair was pulled back with large black bobby pins. One hand clutched a leash attached to a large dog. The other gripped the handle of an enormous suitcase. "We're here," she said brightly, pushing past Aaron and into the apartment. "Thank you so much for taking Roswell for me. All his things and his instructions are in here." She set the suitcase on the floor with a thump. "I've left money in case you run out of food. He eats the food in the blue cans at the pet store on 22nd. That's the only place I've been able to find it. He needs walks twice a day and a bath every other day. Oh, and make sure to clean his teeth after he eats. He's prone to halitosis, so good dental care is very important." Erin's brain clicked into action, and she stared in stunned amazement at the dog. "I thought... Wait, when you said dog sit, I thought Roswell would stay at your place and I could check on him," she stammered. "Oh, no. Huskies do not do well if left alone for too long. Just last month I stayed too long after church to visit, and he completely destroyed a brand new pair of shoes I got on sale at JCPenney." Mrs. Brinkerhoff ran her hand down Roswell's furry back. "At first I was very annoyed, but he looked so sorry I couldn't stay mad." Roswell was an enormous puff of fur. Aaron didn't remember him being so big, but then she'd only seen him from a distance. When he was standing, his head reached her waist. His coat was mostly white, speckled with gray, and his ears were pointed. His long, fluffy tail curved over his back like a question mark, and wagged in ecstasy as Mrs. Brinkerhoff scratched behind his ears with her short, fuchsia-painted nails. "You be a good boy while I'm gone." She bent to kiss the dog on the nose, then turned to Aaron. "Thank you so much for doing this, dear heart. I don't know what I would have done without you." She whirled out of the room as quickly as she had come, leaving behind the scent of baby powder and lilacs. Roswell lunged for the door as it clicked shut, then placed his paws on the door and began to bark. Loudly. "Roswell, no!" Aaron grabbed the leash. "Sarah, help me!" She glanced over her shoulder, aware for the first time that Sarah was no longer standing by her side, but hovering in the doorway of her bedroom. Sarah's eyes were wide with terror, and she shook her head. "Please get it out of here," she pleaded. "Right now." "What's wrong?" Aaron demanded, coming ever closer to genuine panic. "Dogs, I can't." Sarah's breath was coming in short gasps. I can't." "You're scared of dogs?" Aaron asked in disbelief. Following his cue in this absurdity, Roswell dropped to the ground and turned his barking on them. Sarah squealed and leaped into her bedroom, slamming the door shut.
"Get it out of here, please!"
Her voice was muffled. "Just give me a second, okay?" Aaron took a deep breath and tried to stay calm.
"Hurry!"
Sarah sounded like she was crying. There was no time for the suitcase. Aaron raced to the fridge and found a package of sliced lunch meat. She peeled a slice of chicken breast from the top and extended it toward Roswell. "Roswell, treat?" she pleaded. The dog stopped barking, then cocked his head and studied her. After a tense moment, he padded over and reached for the meat. Aaron gave a little squeal when she saw the teeth and let the chicken drop to the floor, where Roswell eagerly gobbled it up. "Okay, you like chicken," Aaron muttered. "That's a start." She set another piece on the floor, and while Roswell wolfed it down, she grabbed his leash and tied it to a chair. "I'm getting my shoes," she hollered loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Then I'll take him away." The only response was Roswell's whining for another piece of lunch meat. Aaron left the whole stack for him and raced to her room for her shoes, all the while cursing herself for being so impulsive. She should have asked more questions. She definitely should have checked with Sarah first. But it was only supposed to be dropping by a couple of times a day. With a jolt, she realized she didn't even know how long Mrs. Brinkerhoff would be gone. Stupid. As usual. There was only one thing to do. After slipping on a pair of sneakers, she untied Roswell and dragged both the dog and the suitcase down the hall to Matt's. He opened the door, took one look at them, and burst out laughing. "Let me guess, this is your definition of easy?"
"Please, please, please let him stay here," Aaron begged. "Sarah's scared of dogs. I had no idea."
"What happened to popping in once in a while and maybe a walk or two?" He sighed and shook his head. "Never mind, I can imagine. Come in." Aaron dragged Roswell into Matt's apartment.
"I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do."
"You could take him to a kennel."
"I can't. Mrs. Brinkerhoff would have a fit if she knew he was locked in a cage all day. Plus, she said he gets anxious if he's left alone too long. He wouldn't do well at a kennel." She winced. "I really hate to ask, but can he stay here? Please? I promise I'll do all the work. I'll come over whenever I can and make sure to feed him and walk him and—"
"And pet him and love him and rock him to sleep," Matt sing-songed, his easy smile taking the bite out of the words. "How about you don't make any wild promises you might not be able to keep?"
"Maybe Mrs. Brinkerhoff left her apartment keys." Aaron perked up at the new thought. "I can stay there with him." She unzipped the suitcase and dug through it while Roswell came to her elbow and sniffed at the contents eagerly. The search revealed many cans of dog food, 2 blankets, dozens of toys, several bags of treats, and a sheaf of papers with instructions written in Mrs. Brinkerhoff's shaky hand. "No keys." Aaron nervously rolled the papers into a tube and turned pleading eyes to Matt. Matt sighed. He'd stayed quiet during the excavation of the suitcase, but his resigned look told her he'd known all along it would come to this. "It's not sleeping in my bed," he said, casting a resigned eye on Roswell, who had pinned a bag of treats under one paw and was scratching at it with the other, trying to find a way in. Aaron heaved a sigh of relief. "Thank you so much. I really am sorry. I didn't even think to ask. I should have clarified with her."
"Well, don't forget, you promised to help."
"I won't, promise."
Roswell gave a giant burp and threw up partially digested lunch meat all over the wood floor. Matt wrinkled his nose. "You can start by helping with that," he told Aaron. End of Part 2.